I came back after months, and there it was. A massive building rising on my land. Cranes swinging, trucks roaring, workers rushing. And right in front of me, a hotel, almost complete. The HOA stood there bold. They said it wasn't mine anymore. They laughed, waved papers in my face. I felt betrayed, cornered, powerless. But what they didn't know was that the law had a secret waiting for them. A secret that would turn their victory into my biggest win ever. And when that truth came out, everything changed. Welcome to HOA Karma Stories, where real battles with homeowner associations come alive. My name is John Miller. I live in a quiet small town in Texas, retired from construction work, and I've seen my share of fights with HOAs. But this story, this one, changed everything. Before I begin, I'd love for you to join our family here. Hit that subscribe button, just like you'd shake hands with an old neighbor. And tell me, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know. I stood there, frozen. The sound of construction filled the air. Hammers striking, machines roaring, men shouting orders. For a moment, I thought I had walked into the wrong place. But no, this was my land. The land I bought with my own savings. The land where I had once dreamed of building a small cabin. Maybe a garden, maybe a quiet retreat. But now, rising in front of me, was a hotel. Tall walls of concrete, glass windows shining, steel beams stretching high. It looked almost complete. Like it was ready to welcome guests. And then I saw them. The HOA members, standing proudly near the entrance. They had that smug look on their faces. Like they had already won. One of them, a woman I knew well, the HOA president, stepped forward. She crossed her arms, tilted her head, and said, "This is not your land anymore. We've taken it for the good of the community." Her words cut deep. I felt like the ground under me was slipping away. Not my land anymore? How could she say that? I had the papers, the deed, everything was mine. But in that moment, all I saw was their confidence, and my silence. I wanted to yell. I wanted to push back. But I just stood there, trying to understand. Trying to make sense of the nightmare in front of me. The workers kept moving. Carrying wood, laying tiles, painting walls. The smell of fresh cement filled the air. This wasn't just some plan, it was real. And it was happening right on my property. I looked at the ground, the soil I once touched with my hands. I remembered the day I bought it, the way I told myself it was my safe place. And now, it felt like someone had ripped it away from me. I turned to the HOA again. "Show me proof," I said. My voice was shaking, but I forced the words out. "Show me where it says this is not mine." They smirked. They pulled out some papers, waved them at me, but didn't hand them over. "It's all legal," the woman said. "You were away, you didn't care, so we cared for the land. We built something useful for the community." Useful for the community. That's what they said. But I knew the truth. It wasn't about the community. It was about power and money. A hotel wasn't for the neighbors, it was for their pockets. I walked away that day with my fists clenched, my heart pounding. I could feel anger burning inside me, but also fear. What if they were right? What if I had somehow lost my land? What if I could do nothing about it? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father. He always told me, "Never let anyone take away what's yours. Stand your ground. Even if you stand alone." His voice echoed in my head. And I knew. I had to fight. I didn't know how yet. But I couldn't let them win. The next morning, I went back. The hotel looked even bigger under the bright sun. The HOA president was there again, giving orders as if she was the queen of the land. She saw me and smiled. "You should move on," she said. "It's not yours anymore. Accept it." I stared at her. I didn't say a word. Because inside me, something had already changed. I was no longer shocked. I was no longer scared. I was ready. I went back home and pulled out every document I had. The purchase papers, the land deed, the tax receipts. Every single one had my name on it. It was mine. No matter what she said, no matter how confident they looked. This land was mine. But I also knew. HOAs are tricky. They play games. They use fear, rules, and sometimes lies to control people. If I wanted to win, I couldn't just shout louder than them. I needed the law. I needed the truth. So I made a call. To a lawyer. And that call was the start of something the HOA never saw coming. Because what they thought was their biggest victory was about to turn into their biggest mistake. But before I tell you what happened when the lawyer stepped in, let me ask you something. If you came back to your land and found a hotel standing on it, what would you do first? Would you fight the HOA right away? Or would you stay silent and gather proof like I did? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know how you'd handle it. I couldn't get the sound of that hotel out of my head. The hammering, the drilling, the arrogant voice of the HOA president saying, "It's not yours anymore." Every corner of my house felt heavy that night. The windows rattled in the wind, but what rattled louder was the thought that someone was trying to erase me from my own land. I had to act, and act fast. The next morning, I walked into the office of a lawyer. He was an older man, gray hair, calm eyes, the kind of person who had seen battles like this before. I laid the papers on his desk. He picked them up slowly, adjusted his glasses, and studied them. After a long silence, he looked at me and said, "You still own this land. 100%. No one can change that without your consent. And if they built a hotel here, legally, that hotel belongs to you." Those words, they hit me like thunder. For the first time since I saw that hotel, I felt a flicker of hope. But the lawyer raised his hand. "Don't celebrate yet. HOA people can be clever. They'll try to twist the rules, confuse you, scare you. We need to be smart and careful. Every move has to be exact." I nodded. I was ready. Together, we started digging. We went to the county office, pulled out records, maps, ownership files. Every page said the same thing: my name, my deed, my taxes up to date. It was solid. The HOA had nothing legal to stand on. But still, they acted bold. They walked around the hotel site as if they were kings and queens. They ordered the workers, smiled at neighbors, spoke loudly about how they owned the future of the community. I decided to confront them again, but this time, I wasn't just an angry man with clenched fists. This time, I had the truth in my hands. When I showed up at the site, the HOA president sneered at me. "You're wasting your time," she said. "This hotel is ours." I pulled out the deed. I held it right in front of her. Her smile faded for just a second, then came back, forced and shaky. "That doesn't matter," she said quickly. "The community voted. We have the power." The community voted? I looked around. Not a single neighbor had told me about a vote. And the ones I spoke to earlier, they all denied it. No meeting, no ballots, nothing. It was a lie. And in that moment, I knew their whole case was built on lies. Still, I didn't lose my temper. I let her finish. I let her feel powerful one last time. Because deep down, I knew her castle was built on sand, and the tide was already coming in. The lawyer and I gathered more evidence. We documented every part of the construction, every invoice, every contract that had the HOA's name on it. He told me something that made me almost laugh out loud. Every dollar they spend on this hotel is a dollar they are spending for you. I went home that night and sat quietly by the window. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Because I realized they had trapped themselves. They thought they were smart. They thought they could bully me into silence. But the law was clear, and the law was on my side. Days passed, and the hotel grew taller. The walls were painted, the lights were installed, the parking lot was paved. To the world, it looked like the HOA was winning. But inside, I was smiling, because every brick, every tile, every nail, was legally mine. One evening, I walked by the site again. A neighbor came to me, whispered quietly, "Are you really going to fight them?" Most people give up. Nobody wins against the HOA. I looked at him and said, "I don't just want to win. I want to show them what happens when they cross the line." That night, I thought about all the people who lived under fear of HOA boards. I thought about the elderly couple who got fined for planting flowers. I thought about the single mom who was harassed for leaving a toy on her porch. And I realized, this fight wasn't just mine. It was bigger. The next morning, my lawyer filed papers in court. And when the HOA received notice, the smug looks vanished. For the first time, they were quiet. For the first time, they knew they were in trouble. But I didn't stop there. I went to the construction site one last time. The president stood there, red-faced, angry, shouting at workers. I walked up slowly, looked her in the eye, and said, "Everything you built here belongs to me now. The law says so." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She knew it. I had one. Yet deep inside, I wondered, was winning enough? They had tried to humiliate me, erase me, steal from me. And now the hotel was mine. But what would I do with it? Sell it? Keep it? Turn it against them? And that's where I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, and the HOA built a hotel on your land, and suddenly it was all yours, what would you do with it? Would you sell it for money? Or would you keep it, just to watch the HOA suffer? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear your answer. The notice was sent, the papers were filed, but what came next was something I didn't expect. The HOA turned desperate. They started calling me at night, leaving messages, even sending letters through neighbors. Some were filled with threats, some with fake kindness. One said, "If you give up now, we'll pay you something small and end this quietly." Another said, "If you fight us, you'll lose everything." I looked at those words and laughed. Because they still thought I was scared. They still thought I was the man who stood silent on the first day I saw that hotel. But that man was gone. Every morning, I met with my lawyer. We went through the evidence piece by piece. Ownership papers, tax receipts, photos of construction, video clips of HOA members giving orders. The more we collected, the stronger I felt. And then, came the first day in court. I walked in with my head high. The HOA sat on the other side, their lawyers dressed sharp, their faces red with anger. The president wouldn't even look at me, but I could feel the fire in her eyes. The judge entered, everyone stood, and for the first time, I felt like the truth finally had a place to breathe. Their lawyer spoke first. He painted me as careless, irresponsible, said I abandoned the land, and the HOA saved it. He spoke with a loud voice, trying to make me look like the villain. For a moment, I felt the old fear creeping back in. But then I reminded myself, I had the truth. When my turn came, my lawyer stood. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. He was calm, steady, and every word he said felt like a hammer hitting the table. "This land has never changed hands," he said. "My client owns it fully, legally, and without dispute. Any structure built on it is his by law. The HOA acted without permission, without authority, and without any legal right." The judge nodded slowly, asked for the documents, and when my name was read aloud from the deed, I saw the HOA president shift uncomfortably in her chair. It was the first crack in their wall. But the fight didn't end there. The HOA wasn't about to give up so easily. They brought witnesses, tried to say I was never around, that I neglected the land, that the hotel was a gift to the community. But every word they spoke was hollow, because the papers told the truth. Day after day, the hearings went on. Neighbors whispered in the back of the courtroom. Some cheered for me quietly, some stayed silent out of fear, and a few even supported the HOA because they believed their lies. But as time passed, the weight started shifting. The judge saw through the tricks. The lawyers' voices grew weaker. And my lawyer's calm strength grew louder with every passing day. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The HOA president was called to the stand. She adjusted her jacket, lifted her chin, and tried to look powerful. But the questions cut through her confidence like a knife. Did the land ever legally belong to the HOA? She hesitated. No. Did the owner ever sign it over to you? Her voice dropped. No. Did you receive any legal right to build a hotel there? Silence. Finally. No. The courtroom fell quiet. Even the air felt heavy. And in that silence, the truth spoke louder than any shout. I sat there, my hands gripping the bench, my heart pounding. For so long, I had feared this moment, but now it was happening, right in front of me. They admitted it. They had nothing. When the session ended, the HOA members walked out fast, their heads low, their eyes dark with shame. I stayed seated for a moment, letting it all sink in. This wasn't just about winning, this was about standing up to people who thought they could take whatever they wanted. That night, I couldn't stop thinking. I stood outside the hotel again. The lights were on, the hallways glowing, the sign half hanging, waiting to be finished. I thought about the money they had spent, the effort, the arrogance, the lies. And now, all of it was mine. I smiled, but it wasn't the smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who finally knew that justice can take time, but when it arrives, it's powerful. Still, I wondered. What would happen next? Would the HOA try another trick? Would they appeal? Or would they finally bow their heads and accept the truth? The suspense was alive inside me. But I knew one thing for sure. I was never letting go of my land again. And now I want to ask you. If you were sitting in that courtroom, and you watched the HOA admit they never had any right, how would you feel in that exact moment? Would you cheer out loud, or sit quietly and let the victory sink in? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you'd react when justice finally shows its face. The night after that court session, I walked home with a strange feeling in my chest. It was victory, but also silence. I thought maybe the HOA would finally stop. Maybe they would pack up their pride, admit defeat, and move on. But I was wrong. The very next day, I woke up to whispers around the neighborhood. People were talking at mailboxes, outside grocery stores, on porches. And every whisper carried the same tone: anger, fear, and confusion. The HOA had started spreading lies. They told the neighbors I was greedy. They said I was trying to steal a hotel from the community. They claimed I wanted to shut it down, leave it empty, make everyone suffer. I could see it in the neighbors' eyes. Some avoided me, some stared at me with doubt, and some shook their heads as if I was the bad guy. The HOA wasn't just fighting me in court. They were fighting me in the hearts of my own community. It hurt. Because I had lived here for years. I had shared meals, helped with fences, watched kids grow up. And now, because of the HOA's poison, people looked at me like a stranger. One evening, I was walking past the hotel when a man stopped me. He was a neighbor I knew well. He looked at me, shook his head, and said, "Why are you doing this? They built this place for us. Why can't you just give it to them?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if he understood what it meant to have your land stolen. But I didn't scream. I just looked him in the eyes and said softly, "Because if I let them take mine, tomorrow, they'll take yours." He didn't reply. He just walked away, his face heavy with doubt. That night, I sat on my porch. The sound of the crickets mixed with the distant hum of construction lights still buzzing at the hotel. I thought about giving up, just for a moment. I thought about how easy it would be to say, "Fine, take it." But then I remembered my father's words, my lawyer's steady voice, the truth in my hands. No. I couldn't give up. The court case continued. The HOA tried everything. They filed motions, brought in fake community leaders, even staged a protest in front of my property. A handful of neighbors stood with signs, yelling that I was selfish. But I knew, behind those signs was the HOA's manipulation, not the true will of the people. I stayed quiet. I let the law do the talking. Because every day, the case was tilting more and more in my favor. And then, came a turning point. A worker from the hotel construction crew came forward. He had been listening, watching, and he couldn't stay silent anymore. He told the court that the HOA had ordered him to falsify documents, to backdate permits, to make it look like everything was legal. He refused to keep their secret. And in that moment, their wall of lies collapsed. The judge's face was stern. The HOA's lawyer stumbled through excuses. The president's face turned pale, her hands shaking as she gripped the table. It was over, they just didn't know it yet. I went home that night and looked out at the half-finished hotel. It glowed in the dark like a monument to arrogance. And I thought, soon, it will all be mine. But even as I smiled, I felt the weight of the choice ahead. Owning a hotel wasn't just a win, it was a responsibility. Would I run it? Sell it? Tear it down? Every option carried consequences. The HOA, meanwhile, grew desperate. They started coming to me directly. One day, the president herself walked up to my door. She didn't come with arrogance this time. She came with pleading eyes. "Let's make a deal," she said softly. "Sell it to us. Name your price. We'll pay anything. Just don't humiliate us like this." For a second, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered how she had stood proudly, telling me my land was gone. How she had laughed in my face. And I said to her, "You should have thought about that before you built a hotel on land that wasn't yours." She left without another word. Days later, I received letters in my mailbox. Some were angry. Some begged me to think of the community. Some even threatened me if I didn't hand over the hotel. It was clear, this wasn't just a fight over property anymore. This was war. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how far they would go. Would they vandalize? Would they try to scare me into running away? Every noise outside felt louder. Every shadow near my house felt darker. But I held my ground. Because the truth was mine. The land was mine. And the law was mine. Still, I couldn't help but wonder. If you were standing where I was, and the whole community started turning against you because of the HOA's lies, would you keep fighting alone, or would you try to make peace, even if it meant giving up what was rightfully yours? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear how you'd handle it. The morning of the final hearing arrived, and the air itself felt heavy. I barely touched my breakfast, my hand shook as I held my coffee, because I knew this day would decide everything. I walked into the courtroom, and the HOA members were already there. Their faces looked tired, beaten, but their eyes still carried that old arrogance, as if maybe, just maybe, they could still twist the story one last time. The judge entered, the silence was thick, and then it began. Their lawyer spoke first, his voice weaker than before. He tried to paint me as greedy, tried to say I was hurting the community. He showed charts, pictures, made long speeches. But his words floated in the air like smoke, empty, disappearing quickly. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He stood calmly, papers in hand, and walked the judge through every piece of evidence. The land deed, my tax records, the workers' testimony about falsified documents. Every fact was clear. Every truth was undeniable. And then, the moment came. The judge leaned forward, eyes on the HOA president, and asked directly, "Did you have permission to build this hotel?" Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Finally, she whispered. No. The judge turned to me, looked at my papers one more time, and then spoke the words I'll never forget. This property, and everything built on it, belongs to its rightful owner. Case closed. For a second, the whole room was silent. No coughs, no whispers, no footsteps. Just silence. And then, the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. It was over. I had won. The HOA members froze in their seats. The president's face was pale, her hands gripping the table so tightly I thought the wood might crack. The lawyer closed his files quietly, not daring to look up. I stood there, not smiling, not cheering, just breathing. Because after months of fear, anger, and sleepless nights, justice had finally spoken. When I walked outside, the sun hit my face like a blessing. People stared at me, some with shock, some with admiration, and some with shame for ever doubting me. I walked past them all without a word, because I didn't need words anymore. The hotel was mine. That night, I drove to the property. The lights of the hotel glowed against the dark sky. The parking lot was empty, the sign unfinished, the doors locked, but it was mine. I walked slowly around it, touching the cold walls, the glass windows, the steel doors. Every piece of it, built by people who thought they could take from me, now stood as a monument to their failure. But as I walked through those halls, another thought entered my mind. This wasn't just a victory. It was also a responsibility. I owned a hotel now. A massive building that could change my life, or destroy it if I wasn't careful. I stood in the lobby, listening to the echo of my footsteps, and I asked myself, what do I do now? Sell it? Keep it? Run it as a business? Tear it down just to watch the HOA's dreams crumble? The possibilities felt endless and heavy. And then, as I stood there, I saw something that stopped me cold. On the wall of the lobby, near the corner, was a framed paper. It was a schedule of events the HOA had planned. Banquets, meetings, parties, all inside their hotel. They had already invited people, already printed flyers, already bragged about their victory. I ripped the paper down and stared at it. Every word screamed arrogance. And every word reminded me why I fought so hard. Because this wasn't just about land. It was about people who thought they could take anything they wanted, and get away with it. And now, the one thing they wanted most, belonged to me. I walked out of that hotel with the paper in my hand, the night air cool against my face. For the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. The next morning, the calls began. Developers, businessmen, investors, everyone wanted to buy the hotel. Some offered millions. Some offered partnerships. Everyone saw the value, everyone except the HOA, who now had to watch their dream project slip away forever. The HOA president even came to me again. Her voice was no longer arrogant, it was broken. Please, sell it back to us. We'll pay anything. But I only had one answer. No. And when I said that, I felt something powerful deep inside. It wasn't just about saying no to her. It was about saying no to everyone who thought they could bully, steal, and lie their way into power. The hotel was mine. The land was mine. And the victory was mine. But as I stood outside, looking at that massive building, I couldn't help but wonder. If you suddenly own something this big, something built by the very people who tried to destroy you, what would you do with it? Would you run it yourself, turn it into a business? Or would you sell it and walk away forever, leaving the HOA to choke on their loss? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know what choice you would make. The days after the verdict were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For the first time in months, I walked through my neighborhood without fear in my chest. But the silence I met wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of eyes watching me. Some neighbors nodded, some avoided me, some whispered when I passed. The HOA had lost, but their poison still lingered. Rumors spread faster than truth, and people wondered, what will he do with the hotel? Everywhere I went, gas stations, grocery stores, the diner down the road, I heard my name. Some people said I was a hero who stood up against bullies. Others said I was greedy, holding the community hostage with my new prize. The HOA might have lost in court, but outside, they still tried to turn people against me. One afternoon, I stood in front of the hotel gates, just looking at it. It was massive, tall and shining, like a giant reminder of the fight I had just won. And yet, it felt heavy too, like a burden I hadn't asked for. That's when a group of neighbors approached me. At first, I braced myself for anger. But then, one of the older men stepped forward. He looked me in the eye and said, "You did what none of us ever dared to do, you stood up to them. They've pushed us for years, fined us, bullied us. You showed us they're not untouchable." I didn't know what to say. For months I felt alone, but here was a man telling me people were watching, and they admired what I did. Behind him, others nodded slowly. Not everyone hated me. Not everyone believed the HOA's lies. That night, as I walked through the empty hotel lobby again, I thought about what he said. Maybe this fight wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about everyone who had ever been crushed under the HOA's rules. Maybe my victory gave them courage too. But the HOA didn't take humiliation lightly. They doubled down. Flyers appeared on doors, calling me selfish, saying I was stealing from the community. Emails spread lies about me planning to tear the hotel down. They even went door to door, whispering fear into ears of the weak. And yet, the more they lied, the more people started to see the truth. Because lies always rot when exposed to daylight. And I was no longer afraid to shine that light. I began holding small gatherings in the hotel lobby. Not big speeches, just conversations. Neighbors came, curious, hesitant. I told them the truth, showed them the papers, let them see the law in black and white. And slowly, their doubts began to fade. One woman, a widow who had lived under the HOA's thumb for decades, looked at me with tears in her eyes. "They fined me once for having my grandson's toy on the porch," she said softly. "I paid because I was scared. But you didn't pay. You fought. You won. Thank you." Her words filled the empty halls more than any applause ever could. But victory also brought responsibility. The hotel wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a choice waiting to be made. Developers kept calling, offering money, offering deals, offering quick exits. Every time my phone rang, the temptation grew. I could sell and walk away rich. I could keep it and build something greater. Or I could tear it down and leave the HOA with nothing but shame. Late at night, I sat in the hotel lobby with only the hum of the lights above me. I ran my hand along the polished counter, looked up at the grand chandelier, and thought about everything. The fight. The lies. The humiliation. The victory. And the weight of the future. The HOA, once loud and powerful, had gone strangely quiet. Their meetings were empty, their voices hollow. The president had stopped showing her face around the neighborhood. People said she was too ashamed to look anyone in the eye. And every time I walked past one of them, they lowered their heads. But I knew them too well. Silence wasn't surrender. It was waiting. Plotting. Because people like that never truly give up. Still, as I stood on the steps of that hotel, looking out at the neighborhood, I realized something important. I wasn't the same man I had been when this all started. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't powerless anymore. I was stronger, louder, and most of all, I was free. The HOA took my land, built a hotel, tried to erase me. But the law turned it all back on them. Their arrogance had built my future. Their greed had created my opportunity. And their lies had forged my strength. I looked up at the glowing hotel sign, still unfinished, wires hanging loose, and I smiled. Because this building wasn't just mine by law. It was mine by destiny. But then, standing there in the cool night air, I asked myself the same question again. What do I do with it? Turn it into a hotel and run it? Sell it for millions and leave? Or keep it locked forever, a reminder to the HOA that they built a monument to their own defeat? And now I want to ask you. If you had the keys to this hotel in your hand, knowing it was built by the very people who tried to destroy you, what would you do? Would you open it to the world, sell it for fortune, or let it stand silent as a trophy of victory? Tell me in the comments, because I want to hear what your choice would be. The morning after everything settled, I woke up and for the first time in months, the air felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't filled with fear. It was calm, almost peaceful. I stepped outside, coffee in my hand, and looked toward the hotel. Its tall structure rose above the houses like a giant shadow, but to me, it wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a crown. A crown they built for themselves, and the law placed on my head. As I stood there, a memory came rushing back. The first day I saw bulldozers on my land. The laughter of the HOA president. The way she told me it wasn't mine anymore. How small I felt in that moment. Now, that same building stood as proof that I was never small at all. I walked down the street, and neighbors began greeting me differently. Some smiled, some waved, some stopped to shake my hand. The whispers were fading, replaced by quiet respect. Even those who once doubted me now looked at me as someone who had done the impossible. When I reached the hotel gates, I placed my hand on the cold metal. This was mine now. Not just by law, but by story, by struggle, by fight. And yet, as proud as I felt, I also felt the weight of it. Owning a hotel wasn't something I had ever dreamed of. It wasn't part of my plan. I was just a man who wanted peace on his land. And now, I had something that could change my life forever. Inside, I walked the long hallways again. The echoes of my footsteps reminded me of the empty nights I had stood here, alone and angry. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like those walls carried my story in them. Room after room, I opened doors and looked inside. Clean paint, fresh carpets, beds wrapped in plastic, untouched. Everything was waiting for a future that I had the power to decide. I sat down in the grand lobby, under the chandelier, and closed my eyes. For months, the HOA had made me feel powerless. For months, I had carried the fear of losing everything. But here I was, sitting inside a hotel that was built without my permission, and yet belonged fully to me. I thought about all the choices ahead. Sell it and never look back? Run it as a business, make it a legacy? Or lock it forever as a reminder that arrogance never wins in the end? And then, I thought about the people. The neighbors who thanked me for standing up. The ones who had been crushed by unfair fines. The ones who had lost their voices under the HOA's thumb. Maybe this hotel wasn't just mine. Maybe it was a symbol for everyone who had been bullied. A reminder that no one is too small to fight back. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood on the steps of the hotel and looked out over the neighborhood. The sky burned orange, the shadows stretched long, and I felt something inside me shift. I wasn't just a landowner anymore. I was proof. Proof that when you stand firm, when you refuse to give in to lies and intimidation, you can win, even when the odds are stacked against you. Days turned into weeks, and the HOA went silent. Their meetings stopped. Their voices faded. The president moved away quietly, too ashamed to stay. And the rest of the board dissolved into the background, their power gone. The community began to heal. People who had once lived in fear started speaking louder, smiling wider. I saw flower pots appear on porches again, kids playing in yards without worry, neighbors painting their fences without asking permission. It was like the chains had been broken. And as I watched all of this unfold, I realized something important. This story, this fight, it was never just about land. It was about freedom. It was about standing up when others are too scared to. It was about showing that the law still protects the honest, even against the powerful. I walked back into the hotel lobby one last time that night. The chandelier sparkled above me, the air smelled of fresh paint, and the silence felt alive. I whispered softly to myself. You tried to take everything from me, But in the end, you built my victory with your own hands." And as those words echoed through the empty halls, I felt peace wash over me. The fight was over. The land was mine. The hotel was mine. But more than that, my dignity was mine again. And now, as I sit here telling you this story, I want to ask you one final thing. If you had been through this battle, if you had stood against the HOA, fought for your land, won back your pride, and walked through the halls of a hotel they built for themselves but handed to you, what would you call that feeling? Would you call it justice, destiny, or simply sweet revenge? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know what word you would use for that moment.